Bibles and turn to Psalm 139, 13 through 16. We're going to be there here in a little bit. We're going to be really in a lot of different verses this morning. But I want to speak with you this morning about making a cultural impact. You know, we live in a culture today that really does not care about morals anymore. We live in a culture that's called a postmodern society and which wants to make their own truth up. And the church is supposed to have an impact on the culture. You're supposed to have an impact wherever you're at, wherever God has placed you in life, whatever job you're in, whatever community you're in, wherever you're at that point in time, you're supposed to be making an impact on this culture. And it's the way that you believe, it's the way that you walk, it's the manner in which you walk. And this morning we need to talk about the sanctity of life. Today is the Sanctity of Life Sunday, to where we honor God, we honor life, we value life. But it's a time to remind ourselves of how far we have fallen as a society. It's a time to remind ourselves we shouldn't forget about what the sanctity of life is all about. It's a time where hopefully one day in this society, hopefully one day, as we pray about this and as we continue to be lights out into the community, where we won't need a Sunday like this. Think about it. The only reason why we have a Sanctity of Life Sunday is because of where we are in a society today. If we were the way that we were supposed to be, if we were the way we were 80 years ago, 60 years ago, where morals actually meant something, you wouldn't have to have a Sanctity of Life Sunday. You see, euthanasia and abortion would be abolished. And humanity would see that all life's valuable, no matter the age and no matter the location of where that life is. We're not going to talk much about euthanasia this morning. Euthanasia, as you know, is assisted suicide. A lot of folks want to have that passed to where they don't have to suffer any during their illness or anything like that. So they want to be able to have a doctor-assisted suicide through the euthanasia. You've read maybe that in the papers, in the headlines of the news. It's not right. It's not moral. Suffering is here for a reason. God is the only one who has the right to take a life. I'm not talking about capital punishment. I'm just talking about in the sense of whether we can decide on our own if we can either take our life or live it. God's the only one that has the right to take a life like that. It's His right because of who He is. Suffering is part of life, and you're taught through that suffering. The Bible teaches that all throughout it, that there's lessons to be learned. We live in a society that does not like to suffer. We live in a society that wants an easy button through all that. So what they do is they go to the legislations and the senates and everything and say, hey, we want to pass this bill because it's our right. We should be able to choose if we want to die this way. Talk more about the abortion issue than we are about the euthanasia issue. But folks, we have a long hill to climb. Public support for legal abortion still remains high. In fact, it's at the highest peak in 2 decades. The Pew Report states that there's 57% of the population that still supports the right of abortion. 65% Republicans say it is illegal in all cases. I want you to reverse that. 35% of Republicans say it's all right. 65% say it's illegal in all cases. 35% Republicans say that it's all right in all cases. 75% Democrats say it should be legal in most cases. 60% independents say abortion should be legal in all or most cases. Now that number's high. Why is it high? I'll tell you why it's high. It's because of the generation that is here now. The 18 to 25 to 30-year-olds who do not affiliate with a party, but they're independent. And they say, hey, you know what? I think this is a right. They're the independent voters. 59% of women said it should be legal, and 55% of men say it should be legal. 2/3 of the women getting abortions today say they're Christians. When asked. So how did we get into this tragic, this pitiful state? Where in the world did this come from? In 1992, the Supreme Court decided Planned Parenthood versus Casey. You know Planned Parenthood. They've been in the news for the last couple of years. They're the ones that's selling the body parts, whether they deny it or not. They've been caught. It's been shown that they sell those parts to different places for research and everything else. You can say no, I don't believe that. All you got to do is do your research, and you'll see it. In 1992, the Supreme Court decided Planned Parenthood versus Casey by a 5-4 vote. The court basically reaffirmed the abortion rights is granted to women in its 1973 verdict, Roe versus Wade. In refusing to overturn Roe, the court reasoned this way. I want you to listen. Some of us as individuals find abortion offensive to our most basic principles of morality. Really? That's called a conscience, folks. And we all have one. But that cannot control our decision. Our obligation is to define liberty of all, not to mandate our own moral code. Really? At the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of universe, and of the mystery of life. You see, what they were saying was this. Excuse me. Absolute truth doesn't exist because each person can define truth the way he or she wants to. Did you catch that? Our obligation is to define liberty of all, not to mandate our own moral code. Well, whose moral code are you mandating then? If we know as a nation, if we know as individuals, which we do, because there's a natural law that is put in us by our Creator, it's called the natural laws, and we have a conscience which tells us right and wrong, and we know that taking an innocent life is wrong, then why would we go against that code? Because it doesn't fit the description of what we want it to say. You see, we don't want to follow the standard. We want to make our own standard up. And that's exactly what the Supreme Court did. They did not interpret the law. They reinterpreted the law. And that's what they're doing today. They don't interpret the law for what it is. They interpret the law for what they want it to say. You see, the court in turn mandated their own moral code of freedom to kill the innocent. That's exactly what they did when they ruled that way. Thomas Jefferson has a quote on his memorial that says, "God who has given us life gave us liberty. Can the liberties of a nation be secure when we have removed a conviction that these liberties are from a gift from God?" When man takes the place of God, what happens? The moral code of the nation in which he lives starts to erode. You can see that in today's news. You can see it on the TV. You can see it in the newspapers. Our moral code is eroding very slowly. Why is that? One reason is because we as the church, not just Waxhaw Baptist, but the whole church universal, does not stand up for those moral laws anymore. We don't say it's wrong. We don't have a voice. Now, in these past few decades, we have done and we have tried to have a voice in it, and I want to tell you why I'm thinking about it. I thank the Lord that our president was present when was it, Saturday? He was the first president ever to speak at the pro-life movement. First one, live. Everybody else recorded it. He was the first one that stood in front and made a speech that abortion is wrong. You can think whatever you want to about the man, but I respect him for that. See, the Bible says that there seems a way which is right in man's eyes, but it only leads to death. Many think that it's all right for this abortion to continue. Many think that, you know what, this is the woman's right to be able to make this decision. But it really only leads to death, and it has attributed to millions and millions of death. In fact, I think since Roe versus Wade has been enacted, it's like 50 or 60 million babies have been aborted since that point in time. Those deaths are from many unborn babies a year who's lost their lives at the hands of the abortion doctor or the clinic. You see, legalizing abortion has immune us from killing. You can see that. You can see that across the board. They say it's a woman's choice. She's the only one to decide. And who's behind this? Who's behind this? It's the abortion lobbyists is who's behind it. They've been a driving force behind it ever since it started. Can I tell you that abortion is now the most elective surgery performed in the United States today? The statistic is 93% of all abortions in the U.S. are birth control related. People don't want to they don't have the inconvenience of having a child. Oh, we can have the fun and not think about the consequences. So when the consequences come from the sin of having sex outside of marriage, which it is a sin, folks, then the alternative that they go to is they get rid of the consequence. See, they don't want to take responsibility for their actions. The pro-choice advocates tell those seeking an abortion that it's not killing a baby, it's terminating the pregnancy. It's not pregnant with child, but it's a product of conception. It's just a blob of tissue. You see, they do the false language to cover up the monstrosity of the procedure. They do everything they can to tell the people and to ease their conscience that, don't worry, it's not a lie. Judge Robert Bork stated, convenience is becoming the theme of our own culture. Boy, what a true statement. What a true statement that is. I want you to think, just let that sink in just a little bit. Convenience is becoming the theme of our culture. As Christians, we don't define our own moral code, folks. We follow and obey the moral code that the Creator of life has given us. We follow the commandments of the Lord. And as Christians, we ought to be prepared to be able to answer some of these questions, some of these things that you hear on a daily basis around people. You sit down and you talk to people about this. This is stuff that a lot of people talk about at work. This is stuff that they talk about in their own families or just out in the streets with friends over coffee or whatever it may be. And really and truly, the arguments or the conversations that you can have, you don't need to have some in-depth answer. They're pretty easy to be able to refute. See, we need to be able to inform others about these issues so we can help them, so we can pray with them, to help them know there's forgiveness in the guilt in which they feel and that guilt can be removed. And then we can also open up their eyes for those folks who may be in support of it never had one, but be in support of it, of seeing what the truth really is and how that truth comes about. So what's some conversations which we hear in support of the abortion issue, and how can we answer those in gentleness and truth? First argument is, a lot of times, many want to use the rape argument for abortion. The rape argument. You know, what about those folks who have been raped? Those ladies who have been raped. Do you know that less than 1% of rape and incest causes conception? Less than 1%. You see, a lot of the advocates will tell you, they think that it's this great big number every time a lady is raped or whatever may happen, that, you know, there's always conception there. No, that's not true. And if the lady can get to the hospital within a certain amount of time, that even lowers that 1%. But let me tell you something about that, and I'm not making light of this. It's a gross and it's an awful crime. The one in who did the act should be punished to the fullest extent of the law. There's hurt, there's emotional turmoil that needs to be worked through. But here's the whole thing. And here's the whole thing where you have to steer it back to the argument in which the folks are talking to you about, is that there's an innocent life that has been produced. You see, the baby did nothing wrong. If that would happen in that situation, you have to look at that there was an innocent life that was conceived at that point in time. You know, it's a hard subject, isn't it? But at the same time, God's got a plan for that baby. You can go in and you can do some research, and you can see that there are some very well-known people in the world who was a product of a rape victim that God's used mightily. See, what the rape victim and what the abortionists say is that, you know, why should that lady have to live through that horror for 9 months and then afterwards? Well, it's a medical fact from what I've read, is that if they do have the abortion, they never get over the emotional end of even the rape. They can't heal. So while it is a tough subject, it still goes back to two wrongs don't make a right. You see, some use the excuse of furthering their careers. See, there's some ladies who say, I can't be pregnant, I can't take this. You know what? Because I'm advancing on the ladder of my career. Well, that's not really an excuse. It's just all about self. They say they can't have that unwanted pregnancy. They don't have time. They want to advance. But we can tell them there's over 2,000 women's careers ended every day by abortion, and they never had a chance to have a career. One of the most frequent ones used is the unborn baby is part of her body. Maybe you've heard that one. This is an uneducated argument from those who use it. The baby's not a part of the mom's body. Whether people want to say that and they try to shove it down your throat or not, it's not. Why is it? The womb's a place for development. The placenta feeds the baby. The placenta is attached to the uterine wall. When the baby's delivered, all of that comes out, right? The placenta and everything. You see, the baby can't be a part of the mom's body in that. Why is it? Because half the children that are born are boys. See, if the baby was part of the mom's body, guess what would happen? They'd all be girls. They have different blood types than their moms, whether boy or girl. They have their own genetic code. So you see, it's not true that they're a part of the body. You see, right along with it, they go and they say the unborn baby is not alive. It's not alive until it takes its first breath. Well, that's not true. You see, when the sperm and the ovum come together, it creates a new thing called a zygote, a new life. This is a new life. It's not a blob of tissues. At that point in time, the baby has 23 chromosomes from the mother, 23 from the father. At the time of fertilization or conception, you have the hair color determined, the eye color determined, the bone structure determined, the skin color determined. All that has already been determined. And by the time the woman has found out that she is pregnant, the heart has formed and is beating. And that usually takes 18 days. You see, it's the way God designed life. Look in verse 13 of Psalm 139. Look in verse 13. He says, "For you formed me, my inward parts, and you wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well." You know, David was praising God for everything, really. He was praising God because he knew everything. He was everywhere. He was all powerful. He could see everything. And then he started praising him because he even knew that he saw him in his mother's room. He said that he knitted me together. He knitted me. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. He fashioned me. He's like the potter who creates the vessel. He created him in the womb. Through that natural process, God's sovereignty watched as he was formed in the womb. You know, I can remember when I was young, my mom and my grandmother and all of them loved to crochet. And they would sit there and they'd just be crocheting, and the next thing you know, you had a blanket, you had a sweater, whatever it was. And every time I read this verse, that's what I think about. Because that's how we were put together in the womb. And God overwatched that. We're fearfully and wonderfully made. We're set apart in awe. We're distinct from all others. I like what Charles Ryrie says. He says, the very least that could be said is that at the moment of conception, there exists a potential human being, or better, a human being with potential, who is sacred and valuable to God, as evidenced by God's personal involvement. It affirms that from the moment of conception or fertilization, there exists a potential moral human person, the fetus at conception, the infant at birth, a person. You see, they're a person, even at fertilization. How do we know that? At a U.S. congregational hearing in 1981, experts all agreed about the beginning of individual life. Now, let me just kind of precursor this a minute. You see, there's a lot of folks that like to do away with history and don't like to do history. So what is that? About 30, maybe 40 years ago, this is what was found. In biology and medicine, it is an accepted fact that the life of any individual organism reproducing by sexual reproduction begins at conception or fertilization. Michael Matthews Ross. Now we can say unequivocally that the question of life begins is no longer a question for theological or philosophical debate. It is established scientific fact that all life, including human life, begins at conception. Dr. Jaime Gordon. So you know what? People understand that. Even today, when you bring up these facts, even today when you talk and you sit down and you talk to people about the medical end of it, their hearts are still so hard and prideful that they will deny it, that it starts at fertilization. Now, one reason why these abortion clinics don't want ultrasounds out beside them is because they don't want the people to come in and that lady to see that little baby moving. You see, it's a lot easier to take your conscience and kind of smooth it over if you don't see that picture of that thing, that little baby moving. God's testified through scientific fact that life starts at fertilization. David even knew it. In Psalm 51:5, he said, "Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me. Before you desire truth in the innermost being, and in a hidden part you will make me know wisdom." He claimed that he was a distinct human being from conception. David knew that. He was not a part of his mother's body. He was a distinct person in personhood. I love this picture. If you can see it, I think you can. Right down there on the, see there? That's a little footprint. Moms, y'all know what I'm talking about. One of my most favorite times when Laura was pregnant, when she'd say, "Hey, look," and you'd see a foot, you might see a face, whatever it might be that Jake decided he wanted to show us that day. The word ben, B-E-N, is used in the Bible some 4,900 times to refer to children. It's used for children outside the womb, and it's used for children inside the womb. In fact, it's used, you know the story of when Mary come to Elizabeth's house, and Elizabeth was 6 months pregnant with John the Baptist. And when Mary came in and greeted Elizabeth, John jumped in her womb. You see, he was alive. You see, these arguments about a baby not being a person, not being alive, you see how the evidence shows so differently. See, we can see in mothers today that movement of the baby in the womb. And it just testifies to God. And it testifies to the value of life. Others state that it purifies the gene pool of any defects. Boy, that's a poor argument. I've had people sit down with me and say, "Oh, why about these birth defects and everything?" I tell them up front, that's a poor argument. We don't do this to people who are deformed now or who have birth defects now, do we? No. You see, it would be the same thing. Well, you know, we're going to have an abortion because of the birth defects. You know, and doctors will try to talk you out of that. You know, they'll have Down syndromes. They'll have spina bifida. They're not going to be a productive part of society. And they'll say the best thing you can do is abort that baby. No, that's a poor argument. Because many times they've been wrong. Many times there have been people who said, "No, I am going to have this baby," and when that baby came, they were just as perfect could be. But then you have other ones, and every time I think about this argument, I think about little Cooper. He stood down here last week or week before last, and he was down here just a-dancing. You know what? He's just a member of society just like we are, and he will be a productive member of society. That's only out of a selfishness does that argument come from. You see, because God doesn't make mistakes. The secular world don't understand that, but God makes no mistakes, folks. You're not a mistake. I'm not a mistake. No one's a mistake. Oh, yeah, you hear that excuse sometimes. Oh, you're a mistake. You're a mistake. No, you're not. God knows exactly why you were born. He has a plan for your life, and He loves you for who you are. Look in 15 and 16. It says, your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were all written the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was not one of them. How precious also are your thoughts to me, O God. How vast is the sum of them. You know, God just makes no mistakes. As David's bones were being formed, God was overseeing the process. He was protecting him in the womb. He's giving him that shelter. His unformed substance that he's talking about is that embryo, it's that fetus. And He knows exactly how the person was conceived and will be. And He has a plan for them no matter what they are, no matter who they are, no matter how they come into this world. Ecclesiastes 11:5 says, just as you do not know the path of the wind and how bones are formed in the womb of pregnant women, so you do not know the activity of God who makes all things. You know, there's still a mystery. Although it's a natural process, there's still a mystery about birth and about conception and about fertilization. You think about those bones being formed. It's an amazing thing. It will prevent the deaths of many women when they're going for the backstreet abortions. It's another uneducated argument. Studies were done before the abortion law took effect. Before the law took really effect back then, there were about 45 deaths due to abortion. See, you don't hear those kind of figures because you always want to hear the blown out figures because it's so rough and it's so awful. But those deaths were due to infections, not the abortion themselves. They didn't have antibiotics. You see, once again, all these arguments take the focus off of the moral choice of life. You always go back to that, folks, when you're talking to people. Is it right to take a life? Now, there is one conversation that you may have, and it's another tough one. But is it all right when the mother's life's at stake? Is an abortion all right when the mother's life's at stake? It's an extremely rare circumstance. You have to weigh the loss of one versus two lives. Saving the life, whichever one it was, or can be saved, is not morally wrong. And let me tell you something. If it was left up to the mothers who's carried that child 9 months, and it was between her life and the child's life, I guarantee you most moms would say, take the child. Let me die. Take the child. Let him live. It's a choice in which you have to weigh the consequences and you have to weigh the outcomes, and that's a personal choice that is made by the mom, the dad, and through prayer to the Almighty God. Dr. Carl F. Henry put it well. A Christian response to the abortion crisis encourages a new respect and a sense of responsibility for the body and its use. A woman's body is not the domain and property of others. It's hers to control, and she alone is responsible to God and to society for its use. When she yields that control through pregnancy, When she yields that control and through pregnancy is involved in an intra-personal relationship with a second party, and through conception to a third party, and indeed to the human society as a whole, it becomes too late for her to justify abortion on the basis of self-determination. You see, all of a sudden, it's not her body anymore. It's not her choice anymore. I want you to listen to that in the days to come, as we've seen the women's rights movements and everything about, hey, it's our choice, it's our choice, it's our choice. I think that paragraph explains that it isn't just the mother's choice, because there's two other people involved, and then there's society that's involved too. The God of creation and redemption is also the guardian of the womb. However, much abortion on demand would contradict or scorn such a conviction. Folks, we have an uphill battle. There's no doubt about it. We have an uphill battle. It says, he who closes his ears to the cry of the helpless will himself cry out and not be heard. You see, it is our responsibility to be able to sit down and talk to people about this issue. Yes, it's my responsibility, and it's your responsibility as a church. Whether that's with your granddaughter, your grandson, whether that's with a friend, a neighbor, whoever it may be, we have a responsibility to be able to correct the false teaching that has become so prevalent in our society today. And a lot of the arguments in which we just went over are a lot of the arguments that are out there. And you don't have to go any deeper than those. I would encourage you to go in and to research a little bit more. You can go into a little bit deeper talk with them. And I would encourage that if that's what they want to do. Make yourself knowledgeable about it. And then talk to them about it. And talk to them about their value. We need not turn a deaf ear. There's many different ways we as a church can stand against the false teaching of abortion. You see, we can pray daily the Lord will open the eyes of those who are going to the abortion clinics. We can continue to learn the facts and discuss them with our friends and our family when the occasion arises. We can join the para organizations who do the prayer walks and who provide ultrasounds to those walking into the clinic. I think there's a Charlotte prayer walk. Every week, people go up to the abortion clinics in Charlotte, and they stay there, and they walk, they pray. And they're there as they support those who are trying to get these ladies to come in to get an ultrasound. We can offer our compassion to those who've been involved, both male and female, telling them of the forgiveness that they can have in Jesus Christ. Can I tell you, most of the time, that churches and Christians are all over the ones that have been involved in the abortion, and they show no love. All they want to do is just pound them about how wrong it was. We don't need to be like that. We need to be loving and compassionate and understanding and firm and telling them the truth. We can offer our compassion to those who've been involved. We can voice our opinion at the poll. Yes, do your work. Every time there is an election, people say, Chris, you know what? Who do you vote for? I can tell you this. I go to everyone that I vote for. And I go to the computer. I don't care if they're Republican or Democrats. And I go and I see what their personal views are. And if they line up with a biblical worldview. Or if they line up with a worldview. Now, you know what? Every one of them won't have a biblical worldview. Some of them have a mixture. But sometimes you just have to pick the best. Okay? But I can tell you this thing of saying, all Republicans are, against abortion and all Democrats are for it. No, that's not true. Because I can tell you the last election there was 2 Democrats who was against abortion and who was against same-sex marriage. And I think both of them lost in their run again for the House or the Senate because of that stance. So you know what? Just don't assume just because a party says this. Go and look. That's the best way to make our voices heard. We can be compassionate towards those that have had abortion and help them through their guilt, help them through their shame. There's a lot of shame in that, folks, and I know that there is. Tell them about the forgiveness that's offered. Tell them about the forgiveness that's offered at the cross of Christ. We've all been ashamed of certain parts of our lives. We've all been guilty in sin. It's no different. Lead them to the cross. Offer them hope. 1 John 1:9, if we confess our sins, He's faithful and just to forgive us of our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. 1 Peter 2:24 and 25, He Himself bore our sins in His body on the cross so that He might die to sin, or so that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. And by His wounds we are healed. Folks, it's a serious issue. And a lot of us just kind of put it to the side. Why? Because we don't know a lot of the stuff involved. We really don't know how we believe and what we ought to believe. But we ought to believe the way that God believes. That all life is valuable, inside the womb or outside. And that we ought to believe that abortion goes against His will. That the killing of innocent children is not right. That's not why He made us. I don't know where you're at this morning. I don't know where you're at with the issue this morning. But I ask that you would search your hearts. And I would ask that you would do something about it. That the next time that you're involved in that conversation, that maybe you would ask the Lord to give you the memory of being able to talk about maybe something here, or even study it a little bit deeper so that you're more knowledgeable on it. Maybe you're here and you've been involved in that abortion, whether you're male or female. Maybe you've been carrying the guilt. Maybe you've been carrying the shame. Can I tell you that there's forgiveness at the cross? That God will forgive you. And He'll put you back up on your feet. And He will use that to His glory. And I can tell you that He will cleanse you. And He'll heal you. No matter who it is. No matter when it was. No matter how much you hurt. Church, what are we doing? What are we doing about it? How are we involved? Do we even think of it on a daily basis, or do we just think about it once a year? You know, I look at how blessed we are with babies. The baby dedications, getting introduced to new ones to the church family. And I think about that. And I think about how blessed that is to be able to do that. Where's your heart at today, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Maybe you're here and you'd like to be a part of our church because you've been here and you've heard a little bit about who we are, and you've been welcomed here, and God is blessing you through Sunday school and through the church hour, you come. We'd love to have you, to be a part of this journey. Because God's got great things in store for us. I don't know how He's working on your heart today, but can I just tell you this? Be open to Him. Be open to Him. And then you do what you need to do. As Sandy and the musicians come, we have our hymn of invitation.